Hi, everybody. Welcome back to CMN 201. I'm sorry that this video was delayed a little bit. I've been a bit under the weather, though I'm feeling better now, I'm glad to say. Where we are talking about Get Out, the movie that basically inspired this particular class. When I saw it in the theater, when it initially came out, I knew that it was something special. I wasn't at all surprised about the accolades that it received. It won an Academy Award for original screenplay. In fact, Jordan Peele, the author of the screenplay, was the first black winner for an Academy Award for screenplay. He went to Sarah Lawrence College and majored in, of all things, puppetry, and then he left to form a comedy troupe, comedy improv. You might know him from Jordan and Peele, but also a great horror fan. Dreamt about this throughout his teens and has been able to merge horror and comedy. And, the old expression, if you're not going to laugh, you're going to cry. So perhaps horror and comedy are not that disparate after all. He founded Monkey Paw Productions, a production company that is named after the monkey's paw, which is a very famous ghost story by W. W. Jacobs, 1902. It's a story that we talk about in my Gothic literature class. And right from the main track, we get the idea that this is going to be a film that is going to give social commentary. So in African language, we get, in Swahili, listen to the elders. The lyrics are trying to warn basically Chris, our main character. The song Redbone by Childish Gambino, Stay Woke, is said in the lyrics about a woman breaking trust in relationship. If you know anything about excuse me, if you know anything about Othello, then you know that basically Jordan Peele is giving a nod to Othello, but with a horror twist. Othello, a Shakespearean play, is the story of a black man who marries a white woman and the fallout that results because of that. At the ending of that play, Othello strangles Desdemona, who is the woman that he's married, believing she's been unfaithful when she hasn't been. At the ending of Get Out, I don't want to give away too many spoilers, but at the ending of Get Out, there is a nod to the ending of Othello. And we know that there's been a lack of representation in horror film. That is changing, by the way, because I wanted to talk a little bit about Sinners next class. Our next class is a catch up class, so it'll be a very brief class. But I've been searching for a film to represent the 2020s, and I think I might have found it at Sinners, which also is a black film. And I think that in many ways it shows many of the elements that Get Out was trying to show. Um, Get Out is a film about modern slavery, and there's all kinds of puns with the term get out. Not only does our main character, Chris, need to get out of the situation he's in, but also Jordan Peele is trying to get out the message at a time period where it was thought that perhaps we lived in a post racial society because a black man had been nominated president. Of course, we've seen the fallout from that since then. But Jordan Peele is getting out the message that racism is alive and well, regardless of the fact that our society might have seemed to have moved on during that time period. And also, there's the idea of get out as an expression, slang informal of disbelief, like get out, that can't possibly still be happening. Oh yes it is, it's still happening. And at the beginning, we get the elements of what it feels like to be an outsider. In this instance, it's a black man who's walking in a white suburban neighborhood. How many times have we visited this idea of white suburban neighborhood holding some kind of danger within it? But this time, the danger is to the outsider who is a black man. And Chris, our main character, who is Shifchu, is a photographer. In other words, Chris can see things. And the idea of vision and blindness is indeed embedded within the film. And at one point, we are introduced to an art collector who cannot see and very much wants to see. So that will be a major theme in the film. Um, Chris's girlfriend is Rose Armitage, and we find out that her family is quite wealthy as he goes to visit the family, and it's his first visit to the family. It also is a nod to Rosemary's Baby, if you know that particular film. So the name Rose, for instance, very much in reference to some of Jordan Peele's favorite horror movies. And we find out that this family, they are not just collecting treasures from foreign lands. Let's just put it that way. Lots of foreshadowing. I encourage you to watch this film multiple times. Um, Chris cutting himself when he is using white shaving cream. The idea of black and white is a major image or a major theme throughout. Rose selecting sweets at the beginning, the idea that she is going to consume. Um, the family telling Chris that there's black mold in the basement. There's lots of references to prey animals, deers, stuffed lions that are supposed to be comparable to African Americans. Um, we find out how television is used to basically um, indoctrinate the masses and to anesthetize the masses, which is what happens to Chris when he's a young boy. Lots of irony in here too. One of the ways that Chris is able to block out the message that's coming through the television that's manipulating him is by being able to dig out some cotton from the furniture that he's strapped to. And of course, cotton has so much to do with slavery. And so Chris is using this in an ironic way. We talk about a sunken place when Chris is being manipulated, and that's supposed to represent the oppression that is imposed upon all oppressed people, but especially blacks. Um, the message, or one of the messages in this film, is that the disenfranchised minorities, they perceive the truth and they're continually told that they're wrong in their perceptions. Here we'll have a kind of slavery where a black person is trapped and controlled in a white person's mind. And of course, that can also be a metaphor for contemporary society as well, particularly in some political instances. So, the blind man who tells Chris that he's colorblind is also a nod to those individuals who say that race has no impact in the way they interact with the world. It's very difficult to interact in the world without having race be an issue because ultimately we've all been trained since birth to think in stereotypes. So, that said, this film had a very different kind of ending. Jordan Peele showed both endings to test audience members and basically decided to go with the ending that we do have. Again, I don't want to give away too much, but I have put the alternate ending as well for you to watch, and that will be the attendance question: is which ending do you prefer and why? Um, and don't think necessarily that how shall I say it, that the issues are resolved by the ending of the film, because the film shows us what it's like to be black in the United States, which is constant, obvious, and not so obvious racism. Um, so I had given you some readings to do about spooky sounds and the colors of fear, the importance of music and the importance of visuals. And in our Nightmares book, there's a great filmography at the end that I encourage you to look at, especially as the semester is over, when you have some time perhaps to watch other horror films. What I wanted to do next class, which is our catch up class, is to talk a little bit more about Get Out, to talk a little bit about Sinners, and just to put some closure to the semester as a whole, because our final exam is on the 14th. And what I will be doing on the 14th is I will be posting our final exam, and you will have 24 hours in which to respond to that final. If this were a face to face kind of situation, well, then you would have approximately 2 hours. So that's about how long you should be spending on the final examination. It will be open book, open notes. It will be an essay exam, and it'll be a series of essay questions from which you can choose. And the idea is that you can synthesize some of the major points that we've been talking about over the course of the semester. And as you know, the semester has basically talked about horror film from a symbolic or representational way. And also, it's talked about how it oftentimes is a commentary of its particular time period, even though we can extrapolate from that to a more broader time period if we so wanted. So, I like to ask questions, as you know, with discussion forums that don't necessarily have right or wrong answers. It's more about the reasoning. So you can expect those kinds of questions as possibilities for the final. So the best way to study for the final is basically to have watched all the films and all the class videos, done all the reading, read all the discussion forum responses, review your journals, so forth and so on. This is the weekend where I hope to finally catch up with some grading that I've fallen behind with. And the 14th is also the last day that you can hand in your final project. So I hope at this point that you're working on your final project. And if you still aren't sure what your final project might be on, perhaps it will be about this film, Get Out. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to be able to have enough time so that you could watch this film and write about it in a final project if you so desire to do so. So you've got up until the 14th, but I would accept nothing after the 14th. So that would be the last day in which you can hand in the final project, which I suspect, from what most of you have been telling me, will be a pretty typical academic paper. But of course, if you have something a little bit more creative in mind, I encourage you to reach out to me and see how you might be able to incorporate that into a final project. But Get Out, as I said, is a film that I think has a lot of literary merit. Jordan Peele was very deliberate in the way that he constructed this film. So feel free to think about it as a kind of literature, if you will. That's certainly the way I've always approached this film, because it's got layer after layer of meaning. It's an hour and 44 minutes. So I'm going to leave you to watch Get Out. And I, again, encourage you to watch very carefully, because every time I rewatch it, I find something, a little Easter egg or some sort of a symbol or some sort of a metaphor. And then next class, we'll put some closure on to Get Out, talk a little bit more about the final exam. And I did want to talk a little bit more about Sinners as well. So I hope you're doing well. I'm doing well, and we will continue on next class. Take care. Bye bye.